Katie Maurice and Violetta were Anne's imaginary friends. Now, Katie Maurice was in a reflection in a bookcase. So, bookcases used to have these glass doors on the front, and they were there to protect the books inside because books were rare and valuable. And they were also used to display the books because, you show off your books as showing off your wealth because, as I said, books were rare and valuable. This was just about the time where books were starting to become cheaper, but they were still something that you would show off. Now, it's possible that the Thomases didn't have the money for books, weren't particularly readers either, so they may not have books to display, so they displayed their best china and they displayed preserves. Preserves like jams and jellies and sometimes pickles. But anyway, they displayed the preserves. But Anne looked at her reflection in the glass door. And so reflections in glass aren't quite like reflections in the mirror. They're paler, they're monochromatic, so you lose a lot of the color, you lose a lot of the details. So Anne looked at herself in the glass and could see Katie Maurice. And sometimes off of glass you get two reflections. You can get a reflection off of the front of the glass and a reflection off of the back of the glass, which causes this sort of two figures right next to each other, which blurs the image a little bit. And if the glass isn't perfectly smooth, that blurs it a little bit more. And so you can have something that doesn't quite look like you. So Katie Maurice was her friend, and she could imagine Katie Maurice as being something different. But when she was up at the mirror, and she was lady blah, 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 it was something different. Because she could only look in the mirror and see Anne of Green Gables. And she was happy to be Anne of Green Gables, as opposed to Anne of someplace else. But, she still had that dream of being the super fancy person. But she realized that being herself was the better thing. Now, she talked about how she thought she could go through the glass like the book, Through the Looking Glass, which I read previously. It's back. So, Through the Looking Glass. So, this is, some of these pieces of literature are things that carry on into other pieces of literature. And that is why you read these things and why you learn these things, because to understand the references. The Marvel Cinematic Universe leans into this idea heavily. But the thing is it only leans into 70, 80 years of history. So, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you only have the comics going back to the 40s and 50s. DC goes back further. DC goes back further. I mean, Batman was in the 30s and Superman was in the 20s. So you have all of this deep history. Ask your dad, he knows more than I do. But so you have all of these deep history. And with the Marvel movies, it's always, you have these callbacks. And so you see these characters and, there's the saying, if you know, you know. So you have this person show up and he's a blind lawyer. And it's like, oh, that's Daredevil. Yeah, he's going to show up in Spider-Man because Daredevil and Spider-Man had all these crossovers. Daredevil was in Hell's Kitchen. Spider-Man was over in Queens. So, quick subway ride. Doctor Strange shows up a lot in Spider-Man and Daredevil because Doctor Strange is downtown on Bleecker Street. So, all of these people are kind of neighbors, and so they show up. And if you have the people show up, but not necessarily pointed out, it gives a little bit of extra joy to people because it's like, oh, I know what they're talking about. And so here you have Anne looking at her reflection in the glass. And people who've read Through the Looking Glass will go, oh, this is just like Through the Looking Glass. And she talked about how she thought if she knew the special incantation, she could open the door and step in. Well, there was a book written I don't know, 50, 60 years ago, 60, 70, 80 years ago. There was a book written many years ago, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where kids opened up a wardrobe, which is like a giant closet. You know, it's a standalone closet, because closets weren't built into rooms for reasons, and so you'd have this 1950. Thank you, Lolly. Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was written in 1950. So that is 74 years ago. And anyway, he talked about this magic wardrobe. You open it, you step inside, and you're in a magic kingdom. Just like Anne of Green Gables saying, oh, if I just knew the magic incantation, I could go into the bookcase. Just like Alice going through the looking glass. So all of these things call back to each other. And so if you know one, then if you know one, you can see the references in the other. And that kind of deepens the story and gives an extra layer. And also allows you to shorthand things, to say things in a simpler way, because it's like, oh, this is just like, through the looking glass. Once you say through the looking glass, it puts you in a mirror world where things are just slightly weird and not quite the same, but magical and colorful. So that's the callbacks and the through the looking glass and seeing the doppelganger in the looking glass, but not seeing it in the mirror. Additionally, the other thing I wanted to talk about here was the apple blossoms. So Anne pulled blossoms off of the tree, probably along with branches, and brought them in and put them on the table so that they would look nice. Now, there are some flowers that it kind of makes sense to do that with. So, I mean, if you cut a rose and you put it in, the rose bush is going to grow more roses. If you cut off this lily, if you cut off the top of a lily, the roots of the lily will grow up next year. If you cut off a tulip, the tulip bulb will grow up next year. If you cut the branches off of an apple tree, that branch is not going to grow apples. So, the blooms of an apple tree are nice. They're very pretty, little pink and white flowers. They smell nice. But the primary purpose of an apple tree is apples. The primary purpose of a rose bush is roses. Rose bushes actually do have fruit, little tiny fruit, and there are teas that you can make out of the roses. But primarily roses are there for beauty. Tulip or hyacinths, tulips, a number of those flowers are actually toxic to eat. So they're just completely for pretty. But apple trees are for food, and almonds have very lovely flowers, and once again, those are for food. A dogwood tree. I have a dogwood tree out front. I think I've mentioned it before. And dogwoods have these beautiful white flowers with these little cutout points at the end. And dogwoods are pretty much for beauty. They have good wood, but that takes, 15, 20, 30 years for the tree to get big enough to make stuff out of. But dogwood flowers are pretty, and so that would be a good thing to bring inside. Apple blossoms, not so much. Enjoy them on the tree. And then 3 months, 4 months, 6 months later, enjoy apples, because apples are tasty.